In the meantime, a warning earlier this week from a major meat producer. In a blog post, Tyson's chairman said that the food supply chain is broken because of the stress that the coronavirus is causing. Across the industry, meatpacking plants have closed, workers have become ill, and the supply of pork and beef has fallen. President Trump also invoking the Defense Production Act to try and secure meat production. Joining us right now to talk more about this is the CEO of one of North America's largest food producers, David McLennan. He is the chairman and CEO of Cargill. He very rarely gives interviews on television. And David, we appreciate your time today. It's good to see you.
Hey, Becky. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, too.
Let's talk about what's happening and what you're seeing. Do you think the food supply chain is broken?
I would characterize it differently. I think the food system is under strain, but it's incredibly resilient. It's been well documented in the press that there have been a number of plants, meat-producing plants around the country that have been closed due to illness. We've been fortunate. None of our plants are closed today. We had one plant that was closed for about probably 17 days. It's back up and running. That's the good news. We've got another plant in Canada that we expect to have back up and running on Monday. But I think the food system is resilient, and particularly the workers, the people in the plant on the front lines are very resilient, and they're very courageous to be doing what they're doing to feed the country.
Do you think the president had to take the step of invoking the Defense Production Act to make sure these plants were reopened?
I think every little bit helps. And what this does is it allows prioritization of PP&E to get to the plant workers, whether it be masks or testing equipment. But it also consolidates decision-making authority. And I think what you were seeing in meatpacking plants around the country was local authorities wanting to intervene and certainly wanting to protect their local populations, which is very understandable. But what it does is it consolidates decision-making authority, and it delegates it to the Department of Agriculture, to Secretary Perdue, so that he can determine how do we best keep these plants open. So I think every little bit helps, yes.
Why have there been so many outbreaks at the plants? It wouldn't have been a place that I would have thought of ahead of time. You can understand in nursing homes and hospitals and other places, but why are these meatpacking plants a place that we've seen so many infections?
Well, they have large employee populations. So a typical plant shift at, say, a pork or a beef or even a poultry packing plant might have 800 to 1,000 workers or more on a given shift. And they typically are close. It oftentimes is challenging to have 6 feet of social distancing. But that's one of the things that Cargill has done, is to ensure they've got the PP&E. We even put in shields on the lines to give them more protection, given everybody masks. But the basic reason is you have high population working in relatively close proximity to keep the production of meat going.
You know, we have all been trying to figure out when the economy is going to open up and what that new economy is going to look like. Will people go out to restaurants? Will they still be ordering as much from grocery stores? And you've got some interesting thoughts on what happens, because the food that is produced for restaurants is very different. It follows different lines than the food that is produced for groceries, for customer consumption. And we've seen that kind of play out in toilet paper. There hasn't been enough to go around because so much of it used to be manufactured for either schools or for offices, and that's different than the stuff you buy on the shelves. What do you think is going to happen as we start to emerge?
Well, for sure, as you said, there's been a shift from consumption of food and food service at restaurants, quick-serve restaurants, into retail. I went to my local grocery store, and there was plenty in terms of beef and meat, but there was no soup. So I think you're going to see some spot shortages of different products in retail. But to your point, I also think that the food service industry is resilient. People are learning how to do either takeout or curbside pickup or home delivery. And we are seeing some rebound in food service volumes. But to the point that you made, it's a different way to eat. The food is prepared differently. But I suspect that coming out of this, you're going to unfortunately see a lot of small restaurants and small locally owned restaurants. And there's one here in Minneapolis that has been around for probably 10 years that announced they will not be reopening. So you're going to see some restaurants that will never open back up again.
As a result, are you changing the way that you set up your production lines? Are you making more for the stuff that would go to the grocery store versus to retailers from here on out?
Yeah, we're going to have to do that. And so we have reduced capacity at some of our facilities that are dedicated to making food for food service. For example, we produce cooked and value-added eggs for the food service industry. We did take down capacity in a couple of those plants, or several of those plants, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. But again, the good news is we've got a couple of those facilities that we have now started to ramp up production. So I think restaurants, food service are getting used to this new way of consumption, this new way of delivery, but so are consumers. So to my point about resilience, I think the country is resilient. I think the food system, the food supply is resilient, and we're already seeing signs of that.
David, how do you plan in terms of production on your lines when we're not entirely sure what's going to happen? No company is. That's why so many have removed guidance in any of these public companies that are doing this. What's been the biggest challenge to try and deal with that, to figure out staffing, to figure out how much product you're going to be dealing with and how you get that shipped?
Becky, I think the most important thing is to focus on the safety, not only the physical safety, but the emotional well-being of our employees. And ultimately, the bottleneck in the meat supply has been around having the employees, having the workers feeling confident, feeling safe, and obviously being healthy. So, again, getting quickly to giving them PPE, to getting temperature testing at the front door when they're coming in. The facility that I mentioned that we had to close because one of the functions in quality assurance, that it so happened that the people that were in that particular function, they were all ill with COVID and had stopped coming into the plant. So I think it's not only a function of having the right people there, the people performing all the functions are vital. We've also been very fortunate because the USDA inspectors who are actually in the facilities have been there every day. I had asked Secretary Perdue early on in the process to help us ensure that the inspectors were there. They've been there. But I think by focusing on the emotional and physical well-being of your employees and your plant workers, that's how we can keep the system running. Unfortunately, it's been challenging with some of the facilities having to close, but as I mentioned, we're seeing them come back online again.